In this video, we are going to talk about the coordinate plane. And a way to think about the coordinate plane is if I were to draw a square around the lines here, it would create a big piece of paper. And you can imagine a coordinate plane like a big plus sign in the middle that divides the paper into four different sides. And a coordinate plane is basically just showing you where to put things. You can imagine that this piece of paper is a treasure map, and where the lines are could help you know exactly where to put the treasure or the X. And now we are going to talk about some things that you'll need to know when dealing with the coordinate plane. And the first thing is the x-axis. And what the x-axis is the horizontal line that is the coordinate plane. So I'll write horizontal slash side to side line. So that is this line right here, the line that goes left to right. So I'm going to write x-axis, x-axis. And you could think of the x-axis as a really long road that you could travel up and down either in the left direction or right direction. And then this other line here is the y-axis. So I'll write vertical, because that's what horizontal and vertical are. Right? Horizontal is the sideways, and then vertical is up and down, or like I just said, up and down line. And you could think of the y-axis as a really long ladder that stretches across the road. So you could be driving along this road, and then at any point, if you wanted to go up the ladder a certain amount of spaces, you could do that. So you could start here, you could drive, and then you could go up this ladder and be over here, right? So I'll label this y-axis, y-axis. And then that, well, let me write it on the bottom so we have more room to deal with the origin. So this is the y-axis. Y-axis. And then that brings us to our next point, which is the origin, which is the point where both of these lines intersect, right? So that would be right here. So a way to think about the origin is just the middle, right? The middle of the coordinate plane. And it's also where the lines intersect, as you can see here, or at the point 0, like it's 0 in the x direction and then 0 in the y direction. So it is dead in the middle of the coordinate plane. So let's talk about plotting points on the coordinate plane. And when we plot a point, we plot them using what is called an ordered pair. And an ordered pair is written like this. So we have parentheses, and then we're going to write the x value of the point and then the y value of the point. So now let's try to plot the point 3, 2. So what we're going to do is first notice that this looks very similar to what I said earlier, or what I wrote down rather. So we're going to move 3 in the x direction and then 2 in the y direction. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3 in the x-axis, and I can write x and I'll write y down here. So this is the x-axis, and we're going to move 3 in that direction, which is 1, 2, 3. And now we're going to move 2 in the y direction, which is up 2, and that is 1, 2. So this is the point. This is the point 3, 2, right? So notice here notice that each of these notches here went up by 1. But that's because we have to pay attention to the value of each of these notches. I could have said that each of them increased by 2 or 5 or any number. So that is something important to pay attention to. So just keep in mind that this first number is your x direction, and then the second number is the y direction. And now let's do some practice plotting some points. So now let's plot the point A, which is 4x and then 3y. So let's count this out. So we're going to move 4 in the x direction, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to move 3 in the y direction. So 1, 2, 3. And that's right here. Because this notch is 4 and then that notch is 3. And now, well, actually, let me write A here. And then the point B, which is -2, 5. So this is still in the x direction, but now we're moving in the negative direction, which is left. So we're going to move -2. And notice here, this is -1, so it's going to decrease by -1 each time we move a notch. So this is going to be -1, then -2. And then our y direction is +5, so we're going to move up 5. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And our point is right here. So that is point B. And now point C is 0, comma 3. So in the x direction, now we are moving 0, which is nothing. So our x direction is not going to go any right or any left. It's going to stay right here on the origin. And then we're going to move 3 in the y direction, which is 1, 2, 3. And notice our point here is actually on the y-axis, and that's something to notice. When you have an x value of 0, the point is going to be on the y-axis, and if you have a y value of 0, you can imagine it's not going to move up and down, and it's going to stay right here on this horizontal line. It's going to be on the x-axis, so this point here is C. And now our last point is -5, comma, -4. So we already know how to move in the negative x direction, right? That's just going to the left. So this is going to be -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. And then -4 is going to be down, right? Because down here is -1. So this is going to decrease by 1 each time we go down. So we already had -5 here. So this is going to be -1, -2, -3, and then -4. So that is point D. And hopefully this makes sense. Now let's talk about what is called the quadrants of the coordinate plane. And you can think of quadrants because it's divided into four different sections, and quad just means four. So the way to figure out which quadrant is which is by actually just drawing a C. So we can, that's not a very good C, but by drawing a C, right? And so where the C begins is where quadrant 1 is. And you're just going to follow this C along the coordinate plane. So here is quadrant 2, here is quadrant 3, and then here is quadrant 4. And it's also important to notice which quadrants are positive in the x and y direction. So we could write here, since this is positive in the x and positive in the y, quadrant 1 is positive, comma, positive. If you have two positive numbers, the point is going to be in the first quadrant. And then for quadrant 2, you can notice that this is negative in the x direction and then positive in the y direction. So if you have a point that's negative and then positive, this is going to be in quadrant 2. And then in quadrant 3, both of these are negative, right? It's left and down. So this is negative, comma, negative. And then same thing for these. If you have a point with two negative values, right, a negative x value and a negative y value, this is going to end up in quadrant 3. And then quadrant 4 is positive in the x direction and then negative in the y direction down here. So if you have a point that is positive in the x direction and then negative in the y direction, this is going to be in quadrant 4. And we are done.